Nancy.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay.
Clearly.
I'm Nancy Lowe, and I'm an artist. I also have worked in science labs, primarily in botany and entomology, and I have a little bit of sort of through the back door knowledge of how science practices works, and I've done some citizen science. But I really enjoy the connection between art and science and like to find ways that art and science can intersect. Right now, I'm a Bullard Fellow at Harvard Forest, and one of the things I wanted to do when I came here is to find out what's going on with the education and outreach team. So I'm really glad that Catherine was able to make this possible today, and thanks for letting me come and visit with y'all. You can find more about me on my studio at nancylowe.studio, but I won't go into my bio, so you can look it up later if you want to. And by the way, this PowerPoint that I'm doing today is going to be shared with everybody. So there are a lot of links and stuff in here that I'm going to kind of rush through, but you'll have access to go back and visit it later. So I want to talk about drawing as a teaching tool in life science classroom and in the lab and in the field. Today we're going to explore just a few drawing fundamentals, looking at materials and some warm-ups and a few little tips and techniques to get you started, a few prompts and ideas for nature journaling that may help you kind of align the drawing activities to the learning objectives that you have for your class. And a little preview of what I might do if you want to do a second session. I could do some stuff for color, or I could do ink drawing, or more about nature journaling. So just a little preview of some of that. And then at the end, there are going to be some resources for you. There'll be some rubrics that are sort of sample rubrics for looking at how you sort of assess the drawing that your students have done, and a whole bunch of papers that you can use to look up all kinds of wonderful information about the effectiveness of drawing for life science learning. So there are so many reasons why drawing is effective in learning science, and I just want to point out that it's only been in the last few centuries that we've really seen art and science as these separate pursuits. It was not something that was separated, 300, 400 years ago, when we thought of ourselves as investigators of the natural world. We didn't really separate the way we observe and record those things on paper or collect data or write poetic language. They were all kind of intertwined. So, but it is helpful to know, it's helpful for you, and it's helpful when you're making an argument to your department head why you need to go buy these colored pencils, to have some data about why drawing is effective in the classroom. And just a couple things, it really primarily, observational drawing is one of the best ways to get students to slow down and look, especially now when we're all on our devices. It's really rare to take the time to just look at an organism or its features and really just spend time with it. And drawing is kind of a trick, to get people to slow down and look at something. If you're going to draw it, you really have to spend a lot of time with it. So the close observation is really kind of the key to everything else, I think. But it also raises questions. It increases motivation to sort of go with further exploration, to look into other kinds of questions that might arise. And it also, for you as educators, it makes learning explicit. So there are ways which you can see a student's drawing and see what they're seeing. So it can be a really helpful tool for you as well. I want to start out by talking about mindset, and this is really the most important thing to take away today, and that is that I think we have this notion in our culture that drawing is something that some people are blessed with, that it's a special talent that's only for a few people. And what I think a lot of us don't realize is that we've been shortchanged a little bit by our education system. Kids who are really young draw symbolically. So an example of this is like a box with a triangle on top of it, which is a house. And then when our brains developmentally are ready to start sort of translating shapes that we see onto the page, that's right the time when we stop teaching drawing in our schools. And this is, this is true for our generation, many generations ago, as much as it is today. There are cultures that are, sort of honoring drawing as a valid practice in academia all the way through, 12th grade, but it doesn't happen here a lot. And it may be the reason why you think of yourself as someone who doesn't draw. It's because you weren't given the tools. And it's really, I can't stress this enough. It's like riding a bike. And yes, there are people who are extremely talented at it, but there are also people who win the Tour de France and, but you can also ride a bike. And what it's about is practice. The more you draw, the more you can get better at drawing. It's really like erase the T word from your language and from your mindset about it, and also encourage your students to, when they say to themselves that sort of self-talk, like, well, I don't do this very well. It's like, this is a skill and you can do it, just by practicing. So really what makes you better at this is drawing. I can give you some tools and techniques, but I can't really teach you to draw in the same way I can't really teach you to speak Spanish. It involves sitting down and practicing, or to do algebra. You have to sit down and do the problems. You have to sit down and practice. So this is an argument for starting it, if you're going to introduce it to your teaching practice, to start it at the beginning of the semester, to introduce the tools and a few techniques early on in the semester, or whatever your section is that you're using the drawing for, so that the students have time to see themselves get better by practicing. So a few things about tools, and this links to a supply list, which I'm not sure if you can see this, but are y'all seeing the supply list right now? Okay, so that list is available to you as a link, and you're welcome to use it for, alter it or take parts of it or whatever. So drawing paper really doesn't matter. I would just say that, copier paper is absolutely fine. Any kind of scrap paper or back of the envelope paper is fine. You want to make sure you're not using something super bumpy like handmade paper or something like that, because that can introduce, it's harder to get details. And this kind of drawing, if we're doing observational drawing about natural subjects, you want to be able to have kind of a relatively smooth surface with something that's called tooth, which is like the little bit of fiber that you can see if you were to look with a hand lens at the surface of the paper. You'd see these fibers on there, and those fibers are there to grab the graphite. So you want a little bit of a texture to it, but it needs to be relatively smooth. If you're using notebooks, I recommend spiral bound, because the flat ones have a tendency to kind of like not quite open up all the way. There are some that do open up, they're super expensive. So the spiral bound are preferable for that reason. And then a drawing pencil, which I'm not sure if you can see my drawing pencil, which on there it says 2B. And that B is, for some reason, that B stands for soft. And what soft means is that it's going to release the graphite more readily. And this is just sort of like a standard number 2 pencil. It's just gonna, draw a little bit of graphite on there, as opposed to something that's a 6B, which is really dark. So I'm gonna leave I can leave a lot of dark marks with the 6B pencil. And then on the other end is something like an H pencil, like this one is a 4H. And it's really light. And so I use this for things like the fluff on a dandelion, or stamens on a flower, or something like that. So what I would recommend is to give each student, like in a kit, just give them a standard, the 2B pencil, and then maybe offer some other pencils for people to use. You could, if you don't have enough to put one in everybody's kit, let them share some of the other pencils, or a super soft one and a super hard one for those other purposes. And then there's something called a kneaded eraser. It comes in a package that looks like this, sort of like bubblegum package, and then it ends up being this ball. It looks like sort of an ugly chewing gum ball, but it's an eraser. And what's cool about it is that you can actually shape the eraser, and I'm going to play this demo. Let's see if this will work. I'm just going to play this quick little demo on YouTube. Are you guys seeing this demo? I'm using the kneaded eraser, forming it into a very thin wedge, so I can use the edge of it to draw a light line in the darker graphite, removing it in a line shape. It's slightly sticky, so I can use it to pick up small areas of graphite. Okay, so did everybody see that? Okay, so the tool itself is like, it looks like something really innocuous, but it does a lot of things. And you can also use it to just erase, like it just functions as an eraser. But the fact that you can shape it into a wedge or something like that, and then it gets a little bit grody, it gets a lot of graphite on it, and you just pull it. And then as you pull it and sort of do this, it can kind of clean itself because it sort of turns itself inside out, like a little, it's a little bit like the texture of sort of chewing gum. So kneaded eraser. And I find with younger kids, you do have to keep them from bouncing it off the floor. They do love to bounce them off the floor and they get a little dirty. This is a paper blender, and it has other names like a tortillon or a stump, and it's basically just pressed paper. And I'm going to show you a little video here. Let's see if it's coming up. Here we go. Everybody seeing that? After you put some graphite onto the paper with a pencil, you can use a paper blender to soften the edges and smear it around and make the transitions less stark between black and white. Here I'm adding more graphite to this berry, and then I'll come back in with a paper blender and soften the edges and blend it out to get a range of grays. Okay, so another thing that you can do with this is you can actually put a whole bunch of dark pencil, a lot of graphite onto a scrap paper, just with your 6B pencil, and use the tip of it and just rub all of that graphite onto the tip of this and use this to draw. So you can draw, like, I'm just gonna do a little, I'm just gonna grab some of this graphite here from the 6B, and you could, like, if you're doing something like a flower petal or something, that's, you don't wanna like have stark lines or something, so it's almost like, you know, blush from a makeup kit or something like that. So that's a really useful tool. And these things are like a couple of dollars a piece. So you might not have budget to put one in every student's kit, but having them around for students to use can really transform the way they feel about their drawing tools. And then it's important to keep the pencil sharp. Having these little sharpeners, just everybody being able to have one near them. They don't have to have everybody one in every kit, but just having them around so that you can keep your pencil sharp. It means that you can add details at a level that once your pencil gets dull, it gets frustrating to try to put in lots of small details. And then I just encourage people to put it in a Ziploc bag, and you can use it, you know, if you have a larger bag, you can put your drawing journal in there as well, just to keep it dry and keep it together. And students are good about losing things in the field, so just encouraging them to always put stuff back into their bag. Okay, so when I get started, at the beginning of a drawing session with students who are, you know, at the beginning of a semester or something, with students who are going to be drawing, I always choose some kind of organic form as a start. And there's a specific reason for this, and that is that, you know, the sort of verbal parts of our brain want to engage all the time. And if you're drawing something like a hand or a leaf or something, there's something in our brain that's almost like an icon of what something is supposed to look like. So we have an idea of what an eye is supposed to look like, or a hand, or something like that. And so if you draw something like that, the the brain's sort of icon interrupts what you're seeing, and it will try to make it more symmetrical than it actually is, for example. Or, it will just introduce shapes that you're not actually seeing. So if you use an organic shape like a bone or a seashell or something, these are shapes where our brain doesn't really have a particular notion of what like a femur is supposed to look like. So you really just have to look. And that's what I'm trying to do with this exercise, is just to get students to look. And it starts off a little scary. I like to start it off this way because I feel like it's important to sort of just get started, just jump right in and have the students observe. So what this means is you're observing this bone. I'm going to pretend that this is a bone, and you don't want them to like they can be turning it and looking at it, but at some point you want them to put it down, because you want them to just look at, from one angle, and say for 30 seconds to a minute, just look at it. And then you have them put it under their chair, and they're going to go, oh no, and put it under the chair and try to draw it from memory. And just for a few minutes, like 3 minutes is enough for that. And then the third thing is to bring it back up and look at it and compare the drawing to the object itself. And, this can be a stick. It can be, whatever it is you have in your lab. It can be leaves and things like that. So it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. But if you, at this point, I like to point out that there are 3 stages to this drawing process. The first is looking, the second is drawing itself, and the third is editing. And I feel like what we do often is we rush through the looking part. We jump right into the drawing. We don't do it slowly enough. And then we jump straight to the editing part where we say, oh, this looks terrible. I'm not good at this. And so encouraging students to notice that there are these 3 parts, like slow down and look, do your drawing more slowly, so that the editing process is really more like, oh, okay, let me compare where I am to what this drawing is, and it's missing this lobe that I didn't see, and let me correct that. So just thinking about those 3 stages. Reminder that the primary goal with observational drawing, specifically for a life science classroom, is the observer. It's not the product. It's not the drawing of the insect or the drawing of the plant or whatever. It's their experience of drawing it and what it teaches them and what questions it raises. So just keeping that in mind and reminding students like this, the process of looking and drawing is what we're after. We're not after, all rector level drawing at the end. There are 3 warm-ups that I find really useful. One is called blind contour. And what you do with blind contour is you're going to draw something that you see, and I'm just gonna, draw my eyeglasses or something. And I'm looking at my eyeglasses, but I am not looking at the paper. And then I'm going to draw my eye, and I often do this with a hand because it's just really handy. And you're going to get something that's like this really wonky, oh, you can't really see my drawing because I used the light pencil. It's not going to look right. It's going to look really wonky. And there are 2 reasons for doing this practice. One is that it's the only time in the class when everyone is on the level playing field. None of the drawings are going to look right. And everyone's going to be really carefully, you want them to do it slowly. They're going to be paying attention to what they're seeing, and they're not self-criticizing. They're just paying attention to what they're seeing. And then the other reason for it is that it's tremendous levity. It is, Catherine, share what you were telling earlier about this.
Yeah, I was actually just dropping it in the chat, but
Okay.
Eli was visiting the forest earlier today with his 5th graders, and we did this activity, and they were very challenged by it. They're like, "What? We can't look at our drawing." So we had them draw for a minute or so, and then we were like, "Okay, now you can look at your drawing." And there was just this like collective gasp and giggling, and it was very, very sweet.
Uproarious laughter. And it's
Yeah.
really nice to do that at this point in the class because people are uptight about our drawing ability or inability, and especially like starting off with that, put the thing under your chair, it makes everybody nervous, and this just sort of breaks everybody up. And but just kind of this is something I touch back to all the time, even in advanced classes. I'll say, you're not really seeing everything. It's like, where's that attention that you had when you were doing blind contour? Let's go back to that and like sit down and do a blind contour of this thing so you can really see it. I just think, this is the beginning drawing exercise done in every day one of a fundamental drawing class. So it's like, ABCs, but I find it really powerful because I think it really wakes us up to spending time. Oh, let's see. Oh, yeah, so I'd already said that. So the second one is negative space, and this is a little harder to explain, but like what you're doing is you're like, let's say you've got some twigs or something, you're drawing the shape in between where they are. So you'd be drawing like this, the shape made between my fingers, not drawing my fingers. And you're drawing, what it does is it kind of just switches the eye to looking at something else. It's just another way to get your eye to see shapes. So this is really effective with twigs. If you go outside, this is a great place to do it. Just, in November when all the leaves are off the trees, go outside and practice drawing just the shapes around the twigs. If you're inside a classroom and you can't do it, the easy way to do it is to put a couple chairs on top of the table and draw in between the legs of the chair. That's the way they do it in art school. So that's a good practice, negative space. And it's really great for drawing through a microscope because you're looking at the shape around the edge of the specimen and the shape described by where, whether it's a square or a circular, frame that you're looking through. That shape can help sort of proportion, like where, oh, this thing, oh, I see now that's a bigger triangle than I had made, and that sort of helps me to place this thing. It helps with proportion. It can really help. Some of this is sort of like fitting together pieces of a puzzle. So this exercise can be really good for that. The third one is gesture drawing, and really it's just a quick sketch is what a gesture drawing is. And so in art school, when we're doing life drawing, what we do is, have somebody pose and you quickly sketch them. After 30 seconds, you try to get the whole body in there. So think of a plant in that way, or an insect or a seashell or whatever you're drawing, and just make a bunch of quick sketches. The idea is to churn out quite a few quick sketches so that you get the overall vibe, the overall shapes and kind of gestures, essentially. This is a super helpful skill when you're doing nature journaling in capturing animal movement, because animals move fast. Birds, little rodents, little lizards scampering under the leaf litter, and you'll be able to capture the shapes really fast if you have this practice under your belt. So those are 3 warm-ups. Then the following tools will really help sort of put all those pieces together. One is sort of using a part of something to measure the whole. So if you've got something that's like a leaf with, some flower petals, like using one flower petal to say, okay, that leaf is 3 flower petals wide, or using the petiole and saying like this area between the stem and the base of the leaf is also equal to the area from this midvein outward, and just sort of looking at ways that you can compare a part to the whole as a way of putting the measurements together. Also a really good skill for drawing under the microscope, because you can't really get out a ruler and measure all those shapes. So using a part to measure the whole. The second one is looking for shapes. So encouraging your students to break it down into what do we see generally? Is there a funnel? Is there a cylinder? Is there a J shape? Is there a flat plane or a curved plane? Or there might be a square or a rhomboid or something like that. So sort of breaking down basic shapes. Here's an example of a painting that I did, and you could break it down into the sort of like a lozenge with a little dip in it and some twisted sticks. Here's another example of a Nepenthes pitcher plant, where I broke it down into like there's a figure 8 where this, where the top of that lid of the Nepenthes is sort of looks like a figure 8. There's kind of a triangle. There's a cylinder that vaguely sort of shapes into a curve, sort of J at the bottom. There's another sort of long J that happens on the other side and a curved plane. And then you sort of like work with that careful looking like you did when you're doing blind contour, and you sort of refine the shapes and say, well, okay, this part's smaller and this fits over here, and you just kind of go back and forth with all of that. So looking for shapes is a good tip for students. And then finally, shading, just really paying attention to where the light is one of the most important things, and breaking it down into what are the shapes of light and dark that you see. Finding what's the lightest part of the overall composition, where's the brightest highlight, where's it reflecting, and where are the darkest darks, and then what are the grays that you can establish in between those, and using your, your little paper blender tool to sort of like blend those grays around, and you can use your kneaded eraser to sort of pick some of the graphite up, so you're working back and forth between light and dark. So those are just some tips to give students for drawing, just basic drawing skills. And this one, I'm just mentioning the light source is coming from the upper left. This is not anything you need to remember, but in sort of formal botanical illustration or any kind of scientific illustration, the light always comes from the upper left. That's just sort of a standard, but you certainly don't need to do that with your students. Now, the important part, what makes this more than just a drawing workshop is like, well, how does this relate back to biology? And I find that the most important thing with this is always to take the observations that were happening and try to verbalize them, or, make notes, and so that it's not just drawing. Like, what were you noticing while you were drawing? To me, it's really, that's the key. That's the most important part. So this might mean that you're labeling a cell, parts of a cell, or it might mean that you're putting notes in your nature journal. You might have drawings on one side of the page and notes on the other. Or it might mean a discussion after class where everybody talks, share 3 things that you learned while you were drawing, or something like that. But I also have some prompts that are part of nature journaling exercises that I do. And nature journaling can also happen in the lab. It might be a journal that you keep as a microscope drawing journal or something like that. Nature journal entries, as you know, really it's helpful if they include the day, the time of day, what the weather was like, if they can describe anything about, I was in a forest with lots of tall trees, or I was in a grassland, or something about what else is there. That sort of thing is helpful. And if you can give them a little template, I have a little rubber stamp that I use on some of my pages so that I remember to put that on there. That can be really helpful. You can get these rubber stamps made like for, I don't know, $10 or something. So you can make your own little graphic and then send it off and have them just rubber stamp their nature journal pages to put that on there. Or make a paper label or something. So gesture drawings are a really great place to start with nature journals, just really quick drawings and just notes. So this is sort of an informal way to capture both drawing and notes, drawing and writing data. And it's super, as I mentioned, super useful capturing animal movement and then writing down things that you missed after the bird flew away. What are the field marks that you noticed that you could also write onto your page afterwards to follow up? And then a common prompt that nature journalers use is, I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. So this is a way to sort of move from the drawing to, all right, let me take these observations and see if I can dig a little deeper and start to ask some questions. For advanced classes, I often will say, what did you notice about the relationship between structure and function? What kind of environment do you predict that this organism lives in? What kind of structures did you notice that might be an adaptation for something? What do you think it's adapted to? For leaves that are sort of hairy, they're probably adapted to a dry environment. So like try to get them to sort of lead them down that road, sort of like from the looking and the drawing to, well, why? Why do you think that is? a more formal way to do this is a little exercise I do called 10 by 10 by 10. And this is a way to bring everybody's attention in, sort of zoom in on a small place. And so I ask folks to draw for 10 minutes and look at something that is about 10 centimeters, it's roughly the size of the palm of your hand. I do call it a palm of hand drawing is another thing that I call it. And then after they've drawn, to write down 10 observations that they learned from what they, it can be something they noticed about their drawing, but it also can be like, I was hearing some crashing around sounds, something animal was back here, or there's a smoky smell right now, or something that they're noticing about the environment. So 10 by 10 by 10. Artifacts of attention is a little exercise I do to sort of capture the attention that I find people are in using blind contour. And so you start out with a pen drawing using blind contour, which I just explained to you. And what you do is you use a pen for the blind contour part and very slowly make that drawing. And you want to encourage them to draw really slowly. It's like a little ant crawling along the edges of the contours, and you're not looking at the paper, but you're not moving quickly, and you're just very meditatively following those contours. And then after you do that in pencil, you, on top of that, just write notes about things that you observed. And again, it can be the thing that you were drawing that you're observing, or it can be the sounds in the environment, the creek, and other animals and other kinds of things. And then you end up with something that looks like this. And you can post them all over the class, and everybody can look at each other's observations. Layered landscape letters are based on something called a palimpsest. And the palimpsest is when paper was rare and hard to find, people would reuse paper by, there might be something that was like some treatise that was sort of a religious treatise that like 2 centuries later, somebody turns it sideways and writes a love letter on it. Or it might be, a list of sheep that were sold, and it gets turned sideways and it gets turned into something else. So I just find them really fascinating and evocative, because you're looking at these layers of time. And I think when we're looking at landscapes, oftentimes we're trying to see different layers of what else is going on in the landscape. So I use this as a way to sort of question the environment. What do you see right now, but what are the other things that are underneath there that are also sort of showing through? And so this prompt is to start out with, like, I start out with a map, but you could start out with a drawing of an organism or something. And then you ask the students to use translucent paper like tracing paper or vellum, to write a letter to someone who was here in the same spot 50 years ago, to someone who was in the same spot 500 years ago, and someone who's going to be in that same place 50 years into the future. Or you can structure it however you want, but the point is to have some layers of time, to create sort of some different layers of time. And I ask students to be specific about this. Don't just like, dear person who was here 500 years ago, like pick a gender, and like, what is this person's role? Were they a blacksmith? Were they, what were they doing? And so this is just an example of what this might look like. And, on mine, I made a map, and then I wrote a letter to someone who was here 500 years ago, and 50 years ago, and 50 years into the future. So this is a really interesting exercise for trying to get at like the layers that exist, not just natural history, but cultural history that exist in the landscape. Let's see. Want to stop
Cool.
because it's
Yeah.
4:15?
Yeah. And actually, Nancy, there's a couple questions in the chat, and I also wanted to like talk specifically about that last exercise as well.
Mhm.
So before I say my follow-up thing, there is a question and a request to have you repeat the 10 by 10 by 10 exercise one more
Okay.
time.
Yeah. Let's go back to 10 by 10. Here we go. Okay. So the first thing is 10 minutes sitting in one place and observing 10 centimeters. You're drawing something 10 centimeters, the size of the palm of your hand. So this could be, an area on the side of a tree where you're just looking at a little section of bark and seeing what's happening there. Or it might be the edge of a creek, or it might be just, one flower. But it's an opportunity to notice that lots of little things happen. A lot of little things are happening in the natural world on like an insect level that students can still observe. You don't need a microscope, but you do need to slow down and look. And unless you're really kind of zoomed in, you're going to miss it. So this is telling me it's 4:15. Yeah, so that's why I like to confine it to 10 centimeters. So it's sit for 10 minutes, look at something the size of the palm of your hand. And by the way, I put students where they can see each other but not talk to each other. Like they're a little bit, you don't want them right next to each other because they're not really going to do it. They're not going to focus as much. But if they're so far apart, I'm sure that you've had experiences with this with students in the landscape. And if you're in the schoolyard, it's not like you have a lot of space probably. But I find like when I've taken students on field trips and they're sitting so far apart, they get a little edgy because they feel lost. So you want to, they just a few hundred, I don't know, a few dozen feet from each other or something like that. So sitting and observing 10 minutes, drawing something 10 centimeters, and then making 10 observations about that thing. Or it could be about just something in the environment. Does that clarify the 10 by 10 by 10?
Yeah, thank you so much.
And then was there
Um,
another question?
I think that was actually yeah, that was the only other question in the chat. But did you want to take some questions now before
Yeah,
I talk about follow up? Okay.
I want to just show y'all that this slide presentation, there's a ton of other prompts in here about sound and smells and how to look at zones, how to do a landscape drawing, which is really helpful. Some other really creative things to do with like wind drawing. And we were not aiming to get through all this today, but I just wanted to show you I'm leaving you with a whole ton of materials, including some kind of designs for ways to set up a nature journal. Like this is one that's kind of like a accordion design that you can then hang on the wall when it's done. And then this is just a preview of like, if you wanted to do another workshop, I could do a color pencil workshop. So this is just a preview of some of this stuff. But I do want to leave you with, before we go to the discussion part, just thinking about rubrics, remembering that the goal for observational drawing when you're doing drawing in life science is not to produce the beautiful drawing. The goal is the observation in the student. So I've collected a few rubrics which you can adapt for your use. Some of them are, I think one of them costs $1 or something. It's on Teachers Pay Teachers. But they're just places for, it's a starting point. But just keeping in mind that your goal is really not to produce a beautiful drawing. You don't have to be an art teacher to create this rubric, is what I'm saying. You want to think about what are your goals? What are your learning goals out of this exercise? And how do you quantify that on a rubric? So those rubrics are sort of helpful as a starting place. And then I've got a bunch of articles which you can link to. But what I really want to do with the last 10 minutes that we have is just to talk about like what kinds of drawing activities have you tried in your classroom? What would you like to try? What kind of resources do you need? How can you support each other with like tying them to your standards or cross-cutting concepts and things that you need for tying them to standards? So I really just want to hear from y'all at this point and hear how you've used it or how you'd like to.
Cool. Yeah, it would be helpful, Nancy, if you want to stop sharing, then we
Oh, right,
can
right, right.
see
Yeah.
the grid
Stop
of each
sharing so
other's
we can see our
spaces.
faces.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
there we go. Okay, somebody mentions the water cycle, food webs. Oh yeah, conceptual drawing. I haven't even actually talked about that, but there are some resources in that in the reading list about conceptual drawing as opposed to observational drawing, like food webs. Making a diagram of food webs is another good way, and ecological pyramids. Any other comments that people want to make or things that you'd like me to?
Nancy, I think I also teach math. I teach fifth grade and I'm a math and science teacher. And I think that I use drawing a lot in my math teaching as well. It's a great way to build understanding of the new concepts we're talking about. We do,
Yeah.
representing larger value numbers with some sort of system, other than the numeral system, right? So they have symbols that they're using.
Oh, cool.
We're learning about whole number division right now, or dividing larger value numbers. So kids will make, we call them like spoke drawings, where they put the dividend in the center and they're drawing spokes to divide it into a certain amount of groups. So I think it's a tool that really helps kids, and
Yeah,
this certain kids, they really function well with equations and algorithms, and they love that. And other kids, they're not
that's right.
their skill set right now, or they're a little bit intimidated, and they find that they can, I can accurately divide using a drawing, and I like
Yeah,
to show how to do that. It's very empowering for kids to take a skill that they might actually really enjoy doing and use it to solve some math. So I think that there's a real nice carryover there as well.
that's cool. Yeah, I mean, it really is such a powerful thing for people with different learning styles. And I think there are oftentimes kids who are sort of like not really participating, but when the drawing comes out, like you have this stealth, like really observant kid that you didn't realize that you had. And it's through the drawing you see, like, wow, this person is really seeing a lot of detail.
Cool. And yeah, Nancy, a question just came in on the chat. If you have any tips for students
Oh,
who might be like struggling with fine motor
yeah,
skills,
yeah.
but like other ways of kind of
Well,
demonstrating performing
with fine
learning.
motor skills, there are like this is a really giant version of the blender, and they're giant drawing tools as well. Like I always recommend that people draw really large when they're struggling with the fine details. There are people who just naturally, gravitate towards little tiny drawings, but there are also people who just can't you know, draw that small level of detail. There's nothing wrong with giving somebody a giant sheet of paper and a charcoal and like really blowing it up. Like try to take this small thing and blow it up in your mind, or look at the sort of landscape instead of drawing some small organism. And like when you're struggling with fine motor skills, using your whole body to like make larger gestures on paper. It's very empowering to give people a gigantic sheet of paper and a big charcoal and some big tools to do that. And for that, you might use something like instead of a paper blender, you might even use like a chamois cloth, and charcoal pencil instead of graphite, and other kinds of ways of erasing and blending. And words, right? Absolutely. Encouraging students to use poetry, and other ways of expressing prose along with drawing.
Cool.
Anybody have other questions?
So certainly feel free to keep jumping in with questions if another one occurs to you, but I want to talk to you guys about a couple of opportunities for follow-up with all of this awesome information. So a couple of these techniques really inspired me and made me think about, a couple of our different schoolyard ecology projects. And so we are actually looking for a couple of volunteers who could take a couple of these techniques and build that out to a lesson plan that you're doing. In your classroom, whether it's with a schoolyard project or not, but it'd be wonderful to tie that in. But I'm open to suggestions. So in particular, I was thinking about those landscape letters. So for those of you who do our Changing Forest project, where we have our 10-meter plot, we do have the students as part of that project think through the natural history of that landscape, and kind of think through sort of landscape futures and what that landscape may be. So it actually just ties in very beautifully with that. So if there's any Our Changing Forest teachers who want to try that exercise out and then kind of formally write that up and showcase that out at our spring workshop, that would be great. We should talk more. And I really think just any of the different nature journaling prompts and techniques with buds, leaves, and global warming are just really lovely. So if anybody wants to kind of take on the task of kind of trying that out with your students and like formally writing it up as a lesson plan, so it'll be a resource for future educators in our program. Um, let's talk more if that's something that would be of interest to you guys. So I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with a copy of the slides. So you have access to all the materials and a little bit more detail on if you want to take that next step and do some of the follow-up and go more in depth with any of this.
And if anybody has follow-up questions for me or wants to try something or wants me to slow down and re-explain something, I'm happy to, meet with you by Zoom or phone or whatever, and follow up with, or an email, um, or just wants to chat or show me your drawings or something like that. I really love staying in touch with people. So please don't hesitate to write me. And just let Catherine know if you're interested in doing something like a follow-up workshop, because I crammed a lot of information into this one little hour, and there's a lot more that I could talk to you about if you wanted to learn more in depth, like how to translate gray to black and white, for example. If you want to learn how to work with a pen and do stippling and hatching, like how does that work? Or if you wanted to do a color workshop and working with color pencil, um, or if you have specific questions about, your class and what you want to do, like we're trying to get this. My students are always struggling with this. I feel like drawing could help. Could you help me, design an exercise for that? So just go through Catherine and let me know if you want to do a follow-up workshop, but also don't hesitate to write me directly if you have other questions.
Cool. And then, yeah, I just dropped the link again to our next community Zoom, which will be the first Wednesday of December when Diana and her colleague Emily are going to be presenting their really amazing educational resource that they developed this summer. And just as a friendly reminder, we do this all school year long, our monthly Zooms, and it's always a delight. We always try to have guest speakers or showcases or share-a-thons. And we are, a PDP provider, so I can, if you come to a sequence of our Zoom calls, I can actually bundle those up for you guys and make a certificate for your kind of professional development license points. So keep in mind, if you're not already on our quarterly newsletter, so you get all the announcements, I'll be sending that in our follow-up email as well. But I'm really delighted, so happy to have all of you guys here today. And Nancy and I can hang on for a few more minutes. If you have kind of like one-on-one questions or just want to chat a little further or have further questions or comments, we can hang on. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I hope that we see you again. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your evening. And thanks for spending the afternoon with us.
Thanks, everybody.